The Cold War expands to infinity and beyond, on. So as you recall already, the Cold War has been going on since the very end of the Second World War. Up until this point, the United States is the only country in the world to have in its possession a nuclear bomb, which has given us a significant advantage. Yet the United States is well aware that the Soviet Union has been working for some time to develop and then detonate their own bomb. Intelligence reports coming into the American president leads them to believe that as of 1949, the Russians are still about 5 years away from actually getting a bomb. However, bad news is on the horizon. In September of 1949, an American B-29 bomber flying on a routine spy mission over Alaska detected something unusual. Instruments on the plane detect radiation. Radiation moving swiftly from the east from the direction of Siberia, Russian territory. American scientists, CIA, and politicians reach one conclusion, and that conclusion is this: the Soviet Union must have developed and tested successfully an atomic bomb. This knowledge completely turns the Cold War on its head. For one thing, the balance of power has shifted. The United States, as said earlier, is no longer the only country that possesses a bomb. They are being met by an equal on the playing field of nuclear weapons. That equal is, of course, the Soviet Union. America is not the only nation with nukes. The horror of the United States is compounded by the fact that we don't trust Stalin, we don't trust the Soviet Union. What will this madman do with these new weapons? Nobody is entirely sure. Everybody is scared out of their mind. And so, a new era dawns in the Cold War. Up until this point, the United States had been issuing money as a means of defending against communism. We had used our troops, or would use our troops in Korea to deter communism. But now there's going to be a new competition between the United States and Soviet Union. That competition comes to be known as an arms race. So what is an arms race? I'm sure you're sitting there asking yourself. It is, in fact, a contest to see which nation can build the most weapons and the most powerful weapons. Because no longer will the old weapons, those dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, suffice. Something bigger and badder and harsher is necessary. President Truman goes to the Atomic Energy Commission, the group in the United States that is designed with the purpose, or given the purpose, I should say, of designing newer, better, more powerful, and destructive nuclear weapons, and he said, I would like a hydrogen bomb. In science class, you should ask Mr. Calvetti why a hydrogen bomb would be more powerful than the traditional atomic bomb. I don't know the answer to that question, but I just know that it was. And the developers predicted, and were correct, that this bomb would be 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped and detonated over the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in 1952, the United States is the first country that is successfully able to detonate a hydrogen bomb, again giving us the advantage. But Russia is not to be deterred, and less than a year later, they are going to develop and successfully detonate the exact same type of weapon. So the race is now on. Who can produce something more powerful? Who can send that weapon the furthest? Who can get the most of them? This is the idea behind an arms race. More and more and more weapons. But oddly enough, this idea of more and more weapons was actually a good thing, or so thought many people in politics in America at the time. The idea that they were going for was the idea of mutually assured destruction. Doesn't sound too happy, but in fact, it was actually a pretty good thing. The idea behind mutually assured destruction was that both sides were so powerful. Both sides had so many weapons. They had put them on their tanks, their planes, their submarines. They had nuclear weapons everywhere around the world. They could deliver them quickly and at any time. And while that was an incredibly scary prospect for both Americans and Russians, it should have also been a relatively comforting one. Because the idea was that if the Russians knew that we could destroy their country at ease, and if we knew we could destroy their country with ease, then perhaps the amount of weapons would actually prevent one side or another from actually using them. That was the theory of mutually assured destruction. That lots of weapons and the ultimate destruction that they would have made sure that neither side actually utilized them. And as it turned out, the idea of mutually assured destruction worked because there was never actually a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, even though many people at the time predicted that there would be. President Eisenhower, who followed Truman, was actually one of those people. He cut down on the amount of money that the United States would put in its traditional military, into soldiers, and he believed that he should continue to build up his nuclear arsenal because his theory was World War III would be fought with nukes. Thank goodness old Ike was wrong. And then in 1953, as the United States is engaged in the Korean conflict, the Cold War is going to be turned on its head when poor old Joseph Stalin, Soviet leader who led them through the Second World War, who killed more people than Hitler, who had been waging war against freedom and capitalism throughout the world, he passes away. And his successor is a man named Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev was very clearly a communist. Khrushchev shared many of the ideologies as did Stalin. He did not believe in free elections, he did not believe in free press, and he did not believe in private ownership of property. But nonetheless, he was not quite as cruel, not quite as violent, and perhaps, I say perhaps, a little bit more reasonable than was Stalin. In fact, in 1954, Khrushchev would actually sit down and meet with President Eisenhower. The first time since the end of World War II that an American official would actually meet with a Soviet official. While the talks were not all that productive, they were talks, and that was the start of something good. Or, hopefully, something good. So we're competing with nuclear weapons, but that's not enough. We're now going to take our battle for supremacy, our Cold War fight, we're going to take that into the atmosphere in what was known as the space race. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched a 184-pound steel ball containing a small transmitter into an orbit of Earth. They named it Sputnik 1. The following month, they launched a much larger satellite, carrying a passenger this time. That passenger was this little dog up here, named Laika, I think. This scared the heck out of Americans. While we were successful at detonating bombs, the Russians had beaten us into space. And this is something that Americans could not and would not tolerate. What could the Russians do from space? Could they make Could they make allies with Martians and the man on the moon? Could they launch missiles from orbit or from space? These were problems and concerns that Americans felt at the time. And so, an organization called NASA was formed. NASA's purpose was to revolutionize the space race, and the American government sunk billions of dollars into scientists, space exploration, more teachers to teach kids science so they could get better at developing space travel. All of this, the space race, was the goal to beat the Russians. Ultimately, as you will find out, the supreme goal of the United States became that of going to the moon. And while the Russians were successful in beating us at most endeavors, this is one where America was successful. But the space race was the goal of being more successful than your opponent in space. So the war throughout the 1950s clearly expanded. More weapons, more money, more exploration in space, but fortunately, no actual nuclear war at this point.